The traditional method is when you sit a child at a high chair and you have your food ready and you provide them spoons full, that's how you say it, of food, and you let them, eat it or not, taste it or not, and so on. And so I showed you an example in one of the last lectures where my grandson was given carrots, right? And he could try for him, and then when he stopped trying for him, then they let it go. But they were spoon feeding him. Okay, so spoon feeding is traditional, and my generation grew up with our being spoon fed, whether it's homemade food or baby food bottles or whatever. So they would spoon feed it to you. So the kids learn to put their mouth around the spoon, hold their head up, control what they want, and then turn their face away if they don't want anymore. So that's part of that responsive parenting. And then so you just stop when they want to stop. And then if they still want to eat, you let them eat as much as they want. This is already part of it too. You don't look at a child and go, I think you're too pudgy for a 10-month-old. So I'm going to determine, I think you should only have one bucket of butternut squash or whatever. You don't do that at all. You let a child eat until they're full. And what they learn from this is when they're hungry, they get food, they get to decide when they're full, and then you respect that. So then there's not a battle around how much do I eat, what do I eat. It all has to do with, well, I feel like eating this. And so you'll never be able to control a child's diet throughout their entire life because they're an autonomous human being. So these are early on, you're teaching them proactively and respectfully how to do it. Now, baby-led weaning, I have a video posted about this. Baby-led weaning is okay too. It's an entirely different genre where babies or people that are rabid followers of this. They put the kid in the high chair and they go, here's your food. And they just give them some stuff that the family's going to eat. Here's your broccoli. Here's this. Go to town, right? And so with this, you don't spoon feed them in the strictest way. You don't spoon feed them at all. And then they figure out how to eat. Okay. And there's cute videos of this and they learn how to do it. And it's a no-brainer. Some parents, it works fine. The problems are the food can be salted if it's table food from family. So if you already made broccoli and you put butter and salt on it and you give it to the kid, then you're missing how to help them with their taste preferences. So you have to at least set aside your family food so it's not too salty or unhealthy before they consume it. So they can learn to do that. So what a lot of people do is a hybrid, which is what they do is they started spoon feeding, but then they give kids, they give them a couple spoons and then here's a sweet potato, go to town. And so the kids learn to do both. And I don't feel like there's a strong reason to pick one or the other according to the literature, as long as the kid's getting lots of experiences with food and they're eating, right? And so we worry about their iron status and we want to make sure they're getting iron-rich foods. One of the reasons to feed spoon feed is to get those iron-rich cereals in. So that's one of the arguments. If you just do baby-led weaning, they can't use a spoon. There's no way they're going to get a cereal in their mouth because they're just going to get in their hair. Okay, so that's all about the feeding issues. So then next is foodborne illnesses or food safety. And there's a lot of issues of food safety, but I'm just going to pick on a couple here that are important. One is avoiding foodborne illness, and with kids it's really important because if they become very sick, they can become dehydrated. So if a child gets dysentery or diarrhea and they lose a lot of fluids, then medical consultation matters. There's cases where kids get this and they need, we break the rule about water if they're dehydrated. And so a lot of times there's products called Pedialyte and other things that can help hydrate them. So that the Pedialyte is basically a baby version of Gatorade without the green color in it, right? So it's got minerals, maybe a little bit of glucose in it, just enough to kind of help replenish them and keep them hydrated and make it tasty, because if you're sick, you don't always want to consume anything. So there's ways of getting around this, but what you want to do is try to avoid foodborne illness in the first place, and of course avoid choking. Kristen, are there any chats so far I need to stop for?
Nope, so far so good.
All right, so let's look at the foodborne illness issue. Don't choose the unpasteurized products. Even if you live on a raw milk farm and it's the best, best milk you've ever had in your life, we regulate things like raw milk because it can have tuberculosis in it, and it's only regulated if it's marketed across the state. So, for example, if California produced this product and Texas wanted to import it, you can't send the unpasteurized milk across state lines. But within a state, I believe it's still legal to do this. So don't go for raw milk, even if you like it and it's normal, because there's a couple of things. One is tuberculosis, and another one is listeria. I'm going to spell this out. Listeria. Kristen, you can type it in the chat. Thank you. Okay,
It's
listeria.
Listera.
Yeah, I know how to spell it, but I can't do it in front of people, and I'm on camera and stuff. And we just type it so that they read it. But so what we don't want to do is pass foodborne illnesses, and they can be very scary for families in pregnancy as well. So you don't want to consume these products during pregnancy and also during with infants and toddlers. So don't eat raw stuff. Okay, and then there's bacterial contamination. You've learned all of this in your previous classes with Ms. Brasfield. Follow all the rules with respect to handling products that can grow bacteria. But in the next slide, we'll show you have to be a little more careful with infant feeding. And the final one, I don't know, put it in red, put stars around it, darn it, put a star around this dipper of honey. Honey is a sweetener that should never be offered to an infant before the age of 1, because there may be spores in honey that are harmless. Like if you consume them, they're harmless to an adult, but an infant, because of the different pH and anoxic milieu of their gastrointestinal tract, the spores may sporulate and produce the botulism organism, Clostridium botulinum, that would then produce the toxin, and they can die from it. So honey, in generations before, people would dip pacifiers in sugar water, bourbon, whatever they want to do to try to get kids to be quiet. Honey, other things. This is a completely inappropriate thing to do. Okay, so. And I don't know if I brought this up earlier, but I'll do it now. So the rule for honey is pretty absolute. However, if there is a baked good or something that has honey in it, or I hate to use this example, Honey Nut Cheerios. Okay, Honey Nut Cheerios probably have a minuscule amount of honey in them, and it's been cooked, and that's been a dried cooked product. And so that honey is not very likely to have botulism spores in it that are going to cause this problem. So cooked is a little bit different than raw or straight honey. So, but the best plan here is just don't do it. Just stay away from any honey products during the first year. Okay.
Dr. Chriselle, I have a question.
Yeah.
So is there any, so say after the 1 year, because I completely understand the reason why you wouldn't want to have it for someone less than 1 year old. But is there anything about the sweetness or the sugar content of honey that would still make it a less favorable food overall? Or is it because it's a specifically produced, product that's natural in a sense, that sugar doesn't equate to added sugars?
No, I love that question. So here's the deal with the American Heart Association guidelines and no sugar till age 2. Actually, sweetened items, regardless of the source, shouldn't be given to kids till age 2. So that's very true. So, in a perfect world, we wouldn't do that. Of course, the problem is when you work with the people in the wild, they feed their kids all kinds of things. So one of the things we have to do is make these rules like no honey before age 1. And then you can also, if let's say you're giving a lecture in the community or writing an article about this, you can also say, for that matter, corn sweeteners, sugar, and all these concentrated juices, all these things should not be offered either. But honey has that additional problem of potentially causing botulism? So great question, because you put it into context. So yeah, no. Well, the same thing, I mentioned bourbon on the pacifier. That's not a good idea either, right? I just mention it because sometimes parents, or historically parents have done those types of things, but the answer is absolutely not. Okay, so this slide is a little more specific to baby food. Notice how cold the refrigerator is. How many of y'all know how cold the refrigerator is? Do y'all know?
Yes.
All right, somebody knows. Okay. I do, because I have a relatively, well, it's 10 years old now, but it says the temperature when I open it. It's never quite this cold. It's usually at about 40. Older refrigerators, apartment refrigerators, who knows, right? One thing to do if you're is to buy a little refrigerator thermometer to stick in there, then that way you would know what the temperature is, because 32 to 39 is safer than 39 like 42 or 43. You know, if infants are at risk, and then you put items in there that could, you know, been sitting out for a while and then could grow some organisms to cause foodborne illnesses, you just don't want to go there. So safety is the way that you want to go. So so if you make strained fruits and vegetables, however, either you make it or you buy it, don't keep them, once you've opened it, don't keep in the refrigerator long for a couple of days. Now, the rule is different if you actually took that jar, opened it up, took a spoon out, and fed the baby, and then took that baby spoon and stick it back in the jar. If you do that, you have effectively contaminated that jar, because there could be bacteria, staph, or something in the baby's mouth that, if the food was not handled properly after that, could cause a foodborne illness. Okay, so what you want to do is what you should do is, if let's say you open a new jar of something, spoon some of it out into a clean bowl, put the original jar in the fridge. You may not need to get to it the rest of the day. Then it's okay, because it has not been contaminated with this baby spit. Okay, then feed the baby, and if they want more, pour more in there. So that's how you handle that. But if you do have a jar and take baby food out and feed it to baby, then the jar is contaminated after that feeding. Okay, and not right during it, but as soon as the feeding's over, you need to throw it away. And fruits and vegetables are safer than strained meats. Strained meats, because of the high protein content, and also eggs are a little more vulnerable, or a lot more vulnerable to bacterial contamination. So even though you open it and don't contaminate it with the baby spoon, you don't want to leave the meats in the refrigerator for 2 or 3 days and then try it again. So the trick here is, kids are little, buy little jars, you know, waste. If you can make it at home, you know, that's an easy thing to do. So anyway. All right, if it's a mixture, then you need to be conservative as well. Okay, so this talks about not using the spoon in the baby's mouth. And also, if there's leftover if there's a bottle and there's leftover formula or breast milk in the bottle, that's done. You throw it out, okay? Don't leave it at room temperature for an hour and then give it, see if they want it after that, because that's enough time. 1 to 2 hours, you know the rules, but they could start growing up pathogens. Okay, so the next kind of concept here is to preventing choking. You want the child in a high chair. They need to be supervised. You don't leave the room. They can choke on things. You need to cut them up. Grapes, nuts, peanuts, popcorn, hard candy, carrots, hot dogs, meatballs, any kind of puffs, which I don't even consider to be food. These things should all be cut, and nuts are, you know, not consumable by little kids. So if you want to give them peanuts, peanut butter and stuff like that, you would want to get perhaps a spread, and spread a little thin layer on toast. And even then cut the toast up so that there's not chokeable pieces of it. Peanut butter can be a real choking hazard, because it can stop kids from being able to like breathe and clear the mouth. So all these things you need to be careful. Even some blueberries you need to cut in fourths because they're so big. So anything that could fit in the esophagus and get plugged, and then go in the trachea and get plugged, you need to be careful about. Okay, so The last thing is issues with toddlers. Hopefully with healthcare, you learn about pediatricians, what they say to do. So as soon as a child develops a tooth, you should brush that tooth, that one single tooth. Get a little tiny baby toothbrush, and you don't use fluoride on it. You just brush it and you start them. They know what's going on. They learn. They watch you. You can brush your teeth, and then you get the little nubby toothbrush and brush their tooth. And then from then on, that's just part of their life. So let's say I brush my teeth with my parents. I do it every morning, every night, or however you set up to do it. So dental caries can be a real problem. And some babies that are put to bed with a bottle, you're never supposed to put them to bed with a bottle because they can choke. But also if you put them to bed with a bottle on their back, then the milk will pool around their teeth and help grow the Streptococcus mutans, which is, can help create cavities. So basically don't put them to sleep with a bottle. And then having kids eat all day can be a problem. So set snacks and meal times is beneficial for appetite control and also to protect their teeth. All right, fluoride we've talked about a little bit. We want enough fluoride in the water to help prevent the development of dental caries, but not so much that it causes fluorosis. So that's something to check on your local water supply. Okay, so the final, I did this. Okay, the final slide has to do with two issues with kids, two additional issues. One is constipation, other one is toddler diarrhea. So constipation is something kids do stool holding, and what they'll do is instead of going to the bathroom, they'll hold it, and if they hold it, then the water gets subtracted from it, and so then it's not as soft as it would have been, and so then it's harder for them to eliminate, and then that becomes a self-fulfilling process because when they go to try to go, it hurts because they're trying to pass a hard stool instead of a soft stool, so then they get scared because it hurts, and they'll hold it some more. And so then you develop this circuitous problem, and it's really common among parents to have to deal with this with their kids. Because psychologically, there's a lot involved in learning how to eat food, process it, figure out when you need to go to the bathroom, let it happen. And they go from diapers to potty training, right? So there's a lot of cognitive function involved in these things. So I did not do that. Okay, so stool holding is a problem. A lot of parents, this usually starts when they eat food. So sometimes kids are fine, and in 6 months you give them those first bites of carrots and then they don't go anymore. A lot of kids do this. So parents freak out. So one thing to do is let it go for a while, see if you can get them to drink more water, see if it works itself out. Their bowel habits may change, but they may not be negative. But some kids do have a real problem and they won't go, and they have to go at some point. So, you surely don't want to give them a laxative that's painful. And so pediatricians are pretty much recommending you try different juices. And then if that doesn't work, and then all our sweet tooth stuff goes out the window, right? And we go, no sweets. And then you're like, here's some apple juice, right? So apple juice is actually constipating, but sometimes people offer juices for this, like prune juice. But another solution here, and this is in the literature pretty well, is there's a product called Miralax that you can find in all the drugstores, and there's also off-label brands of this too, Purelax or something like that. It's a white powder, and you take the white powder, it's in a plastic bottle, container, and you add it to a fluid. Let's say you have a cup, 4 ounces of a fluid, try milk if the kid's over 1, or whatever you can try, and add that to it, see if you can get it to dissolve and see if they'll take it. Now, with adults, they can take this product. You can take a cap full of Miralax and pour it in your hot coffee and you'll never taste it. It dissolves and you can't tell it's there. With kids, they're not drinking hot beverages. So whatever they're drinking that's a cool beverage, this product is going to be a little grainy. And so some of them will reject their food and you have trouble getting this into them. Having said this, why this is such a good product, and there's so much literature on it, is what it does is this white powder that should go away in a warm, in a warm fluid, and what happens is it stays in the GI tract. It's inert, but what it does is it pulls in water. So if a child has been stool holding and their stool's really mean and hard to pass, with daily use of this product, the stool gets softer and then it's easier to pass, and then you can get past this stool holding issue. Does anybody have a question about this? I know in nutrition we always talk about pooping all the time. You've had Miss Brasfield's class, and she's all about the poop, but it's just part of what goes in, what comes out. Are there any questions about this?
We haven't had any questions yet about constipation or diarrhea, but we did have a couple questions about the cavities or the teeth slide.
Okay, let me ask first, are there any questions about this? And then I'll go to that. Any constipation questions, or does that make sense to y'all? All right, so go to the dental caries questions.
I just had a question. Whenever you say eat crunchy foods, is it eating crunchy foods to avoid dental caries, or eating crunchy foods causes dental caries?
No, you know what? That's what when I was reading this, I thought I left that comment out. Usually what crunchy foods do is it helps, like an apple is better than applesauce. An apple is more likely to be abrasive and might pull off stuff, whereas applesauce may be more likely to pull around. So that's all I had to say about that. Thanks, that's a good question.
And then there was another question too. Does drinking cow's milk before the age of 1 also attribute to dental caries as well as obesity?
Not more than anything else. Okay. All right, so let's go to the next one. Now I'm gonna have to open up and properly screen share this. Okay, so I'm going to take a 1 second break and go get some water, and I'll be right back. Okay, so this next lecture is basically an introduction to allergies. And allergies are interesting because for those of you that don't have allergies and don't have food allergies, it's a no-brainer, you don't even think about it. But for people that have allergies, it can be a completely life-shaping event. I have a grandson on my husband's side of the family, and he's 7 now, and he has a severe peanut allergy. And a couple other nuts affect him. So he's been to the hospital twice. He's 7 now. Everywhere he goes, he's got an EpiPen. He's got an EpiPen in his backpack. If we take care of him, he comes over with EpiPens. We think about where the EpiPen is. We have that conversation every time because it's life or death for him. He can be in a situation where even somebody may touch him with peanuts or pecans. I believe he's had a bad effect with, and he would die without medical intervention. And he has his father's a doctor, and they've done everything they can, and it's not really curable once kids get these severe allergies. So not all allergies are that severe, but they can be, so we need to take this very seriously. So this is the outline for allergies. So I'm going to talk about a couple different terms. There's food allergy and food sensitivity or intolerance. I want you to know the difference between those. And then also, how common are they? And then what makes an allergy happen? And then what do we do about it? And what are the actual guidelines now? So this is how we're going to move forward with this. Okay, so there are 2 terms or 2 sets of categories that we're going to talk about a lot here. One is a food allergy, and the other one is food. Every time I touch my mouse, it jumps. Okay, food allergy, and then so this is the food allergy, and this is the side about food sensitivity and intolerance, and these are 2 different things. So Some people may have an allergy to a food or also an intolerance to it. So sometimes they overlap a little bit. But they're two clearly different conditions. So the purpose here is to be clear about how they are different. So let's start out with food allergy, and then we'll move over here. A food allergy, notice the thing here, it says IgE mediated. This is Ig stands for immunoglobulin. Kristen, you want to type that in the chat? Immunoglobulin. Okay, so this is a molecule a protein molecule in the body that mediates the reaction to the food. So the true food allergy is mediated by this particular kind of immunoglobulin or antibody. Food intolerance is not mediated in the same way. So these are two different reactions to foods. One is life-threatening, or can be, and one is annoying, okay, and just may cause discomfort. So we're going to be clear about these two things. So a true food allergy has an IgE or immunoglobulin E reaction. So those antibodies are in the blood. And when someone is having an allergic reaction, it occurs within 2 hours. Okay, so if I'm going to I eat a peanut and I have a peanut allergy, within 2 hours, I'm going to have my response. It's not the next day or 6 hours later. And the symptoms can be, hives or itching and all this kind of stuff, all the way up to anaphylactic shock. So there's a range of symptoms. We'll go over this some more. Food intolerance is not mediated by IgE. And so it's a different reaction. Let's talk about, because some of these you're going to be familiar with. No IgE antibodies, but can you think of a food intolerance you've learned about previously? Is there anything that people are intolerant of?
Lactose intolerance.
Perfect. Lactose intolerance, right? So lactose intolerance is you may not have the enzyme enough of an enzyme to break down lactose into glucose and galactose. Lactose intolerance is not an allergy, it's an intolerance. You can have, in contrast, an allergic reaction to proteins in milk, not the lactose, but proteins. That could actually be a food allergy. People are sometimes, parents can be confused between the two. If their kid can't consume milk, it could be for one of these two reasons. One, they just don't have enough lactase and they're uncomfortable. They get bloated and whatever after they have milk. Another one is they have a strong reaction. It can be a range of symptoms. Sometimes they're serious. Okay, so these are the major two categories. Okay, so let's talk about the food intolerance sensitivity first. And I have a very small amount of information here because the bulk of this is going to be on food allergies. So this is our slide on food intolerance and sensitivity. We don't always know. Somebody may say, whenever I eat a potato, I get a headache. And they feel like that happens enough to where they're having a intolerance to this. Now we can't always say, oh, well, this is a mechanism that's going on. We just have to recognize that they may have an intolerance to food for whatever reason, and then they should avoid those foods, right? So that's an intolerance or sensitivity. So they may have, just like you mentioned, it could be a lactose intolerance, so they don't have the enzyme lactase or enough of it. So that could be one thing. Some people react to compounds in cheese and gives them headaches. Other people react to caffeine and coffee, tea or chocolate, and they feel uncomfortable. That's an intolerance or sensitivity, but it's not an allergic reaction. You can also get rashes and things like that from foods, but this is a different mechanism than a true allergy. So, but look here, here's a list of items that people often have sensitivity about, And these are this is very close to the same list for people that have food allergies. Sometimes people don't know, do I have a food allergy? Does my kid have a food allergy or an intolerance? So this is where sometimes testing needs to happen to find out, get pediatrician input to find out what the cause is.
Somebody asked if bloating is a sign of intolerance.
Yeah, it absolutely. So if you look back at this one, food and often just gastrointestinal symptoms. So if you think about lactose intolerance, often it's, diarrhea and bloating and discomfort. It's serious for people that are experiencing it, but it's not life-threatening. But yeah, that's one example.
There was another question. So if people have repeated sensitivities to a food, is it something worth mentioning to the doctor to have recorded on their chart since it's not a full allergy?
There's no reason not to, but a doctor's just going to say, don't eat that. This is basically what we would say. If you notice it's problematic enough, don't worry about it. But it doesn't hurt to bring it up. But the serious stuff is the allergies, right? Life-threatening. So, but learning about intolerances, this is where dietitians can really help people figure out what you can eat. Okay, and so not everybody has the rich background in nutrition that you guys have. Okay, so food allergy. The definition is an adverse health effect from a specific immune response that's reproducible. So if you're allergic to peanuts, every time you eat the peanuts, you have either the same reaction or it's worse. You don't skip reactions sometimes. If you're not allergic to peanuts, let's say you eat your first peanuts and you throw up, or a second time, and then a week later you eat peanuts and you don't throw up or you don't have a strong immune response, you're not really allergic to the peanuts. An allergy is reproducible. This is how they can test to see if it's serious. So anyway, that's not even that funny of a cartoon, but I was just looking for one. But anyway, okay. Here's the common food allergies. All 8 of these are required to be included in a separate list on a food label, sorry. So if you look at the label, for those of people who have allergies, that part of the label is a very big deal. And so just to talk about what a big deal it is. So back to my 7-year-old grandson, he can't go into any child care facility where any kid in the room brought nuts in their lunchbox. He could even get triggered if somebody had it for breakfast. Less likely, but the sensitivity can be so great. So obviously we hang out. So his parents have a very long list. If they eat at a restaurant, they have a very long list of what's here, tell me what's in this food exactly. Are you sure? They're not a long list, but they're very careful about making sure that the allergens that he is exposed to aren't that serious, and they take the EpiPen with them everywhere. So if there's peanuts in the food, they need to know. And they may, we've gone to eat at a Clay Pit in Austin, an Indian food restaurant. And if you want a dish with cashews in it, you don't want to sit by them because the cashew fumes or me drop it on his plate or something that goes by. So basically when we go out to eat with these guys, we all follow the diet to make sure that nothing gets in his way that could cause this. So it's very serious.
I have a question. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, don't apologize.
So will it be that serious as even when they get older, like adulthood?
Okay. Some of these we outgrow, and I'll go through this a little bit. Some allergies people outgrow, but the peanut allergy, we haven't figured out how to get people past that. There's some treatments now where they give people little minuscule amounts and see if they can, like in little tablets. And he's been through this protocol where we get a little bit more, and see what they can tolerate, just so that it's not such a life and death thing when they die. But he won't get better. So the common allergens, milk, this is real common, eggs, kids may do okay. It's not that many kids, and when it's cooked, it may be okay. Maybe the raw egg will do it. Peanuts, this is the most serious one in terms of anaphylactic shock, okay, anaphylactic reactions. And then tree nuts, getting more of that. Soy. A lot of times if kids have a cow milk allergy, they also have a soy milk allergy. So it's interesting. So they pretty much overlap. Wheat can be a problem with some kids. Fish, and then shellfish. This is considered to be one of the more dangerous ones. It's pretty rare. But so these are the 8 most common allergens. Now, remember the rules. If you have an allergy, you need to look at these food labels. So the 8 allergens are supposed to be on here, and oftentimes they say may contain. That's because if it's a plant that manufactures a variety of foods, if peanuts or any of these other products are in the plant itself, they have to state that because there could be cross-contamination. So let's say you're buying some kind of granola, right? And you get a granola that you don't want any nuts in or anything. They have to make sure they don't make that granola in a place where some of the granola has nuts in it. So the label needs to indicate if it's safe or not. Okay, so how common are food allergies? Here's some numbers for you. A lot of people have food allergies. People go to the ER for food allergies. I'm not going to ask you these numbers. I just want you to have an idea here. And this is kind of interesting here. We're going to bring this back full circle. But we've actually seen an increase in peanut allergies between 1997 and 2011. Now, what happened here is we saw, and I'm going to talk about this again, but we started noticing that kids were having severe reactions to peanuts. So then we removed peanuts from schools and child care centers and tried to, and told parents not to offer these products while they were little. Because it made sense. Well, it turns out that was exactly the wrong thing to do. It turns out that early, as we'll talk about this, early exposure is better than late exposure. So we'll talk about it. So we had a period of time here where we were following the wrong guidelines, keeping peanuts away from families, and actually making the problem worse. Okay, so food allergies are important to people, especially when they experience them. Okay, let's go back. You remember I talked about immunoglobulin E? And I said food sensitivity does not involve this particular antibody. However, food allergies do. So if someone has a true food allergy, then that allergy is mediated by a class of protein called IgE, class of antibodies. Okay. And immunoglobulin E is an antibody produced by the immune system. The overproduction is what causes the allergy. And so we know that's true. But what's interesting is we don't have this reaction the first time we're exposed. So for example, I'm a 8-month-old kid. I've never had peanuts. My first bite of peanuts, peanut butter, I may not have a reaction, whether or not I'm developing an allergy or not. But the next time I have them, if I'm developing an allergy, the second exposure can trigger the immunoglobulin E, and the kid's been sensitized, and the next exposure can be very serious. Okay, I'm going to give us a 2-minute break here. And so just pause for a second and then I'll be right back. Okay, I need some more water. I apologize. I'm having a little bit of nausea, so I'm holding on here, but I apologize. Okay, so anyway, so the first exposure may not cause a reaction. So if they have their first exposure to peanuts, they may, you don't know yet. And then their second one, though, they're kind of, what they're doing is preloading their immune system. So they have these immunoglobulin E's. So if this is a peanut protein, and this is a cell of the immune system called a mast cell, what it does is produces inflammatory compounds. So this is how we manage reactions. So if we have IgE produced, first time we had peanuts, we made a bunch of these. The second time we eat peanuts, then these are here and they help the antigen, the peanut protein, bind to the cell, and then we get the secretion of all these chemicals that is what mediates the reaction. Okay, so IgE mediated mean there's an antibody that's involved in presenting that antigen to a cell that produces things. An example of what the cell might do is produce histamine. Histamine is something that causes, your nose to run and your some swelling to occur and some discomfort, right? And so, that's produced by these cells of the immune system. Okay, so I just mentioned this earlier, but people have to be sensitized before they actually have these reactions. Your first exposure to peanuts won't do it, your second one will. So sensitization precedes development. Food allergens, and the term here is antigen. You'll see this. An allergen is an antigen, is absorbed through the intestinal lining. The body, this is part of sensitization. The body creates an immune response. They make IgEs, okay, particular antibodies, so IgEs, and they are sensitized. And then the IgEs are there, and the next time the person is exposed to peanuts or the antigen, then the IgE causes that reaction to occur and it makes people sick. Okay, this is probably more detail than I want to go into during class, but I put it here for you to take a look at if you would like to do that. Here's a simpler reaction. So here's an antigen such as your peanut allergy, or peanut molecules, sorry. And so your exposure to peanuts causes certain cells to make immunoglobulin E, just like the slide we looked at before. These guys interact with these cells like a mast cell. Here's your peanut protein. It binds IgE and that causes your cells to overreact and produce compounds that make you uncomfortable, like too much histamine. Okay, while we're doing this, we can create, while we're just having this first exposure, we're also setting the body up to remember what this antigen is like. Okay, I think this is a helpful example. Anybody here allergic to ragweed? It's that time of year.
Yes.
Okay, you know if you are generally because you hate September. Okay, so here's an example. The first time a person runs across an allergen such as ragweed, here you go. She makes large amounts of the IgE antibody. They bind to the mast cell. The second time they have a brush with ragweed, the cell is ready to go and it produces all those histamines. And that's what makes the nose stuffy and the sneezing happen and all that kind of stuff. So this is the same kind of thing that happens with food. It's just easier to understand with ragweed. Okay, so we're going to start. Yeah.
So, and I don't know if we'll end up covering this in a later slide, but it was something that I thought of. But so I think I understand as far as the intolerance. I know I understand the difference between the intolerance and then the actual allergy. But in my personal life, I've experienced the acquisition of lactose intolerance. From me being vegan.
Yeah.
My first accidental run-in with dairy after 2 years resulted in, something rather, uncomfortable.
Sure.
to not go into detail. So I know that intolerances can be something that is acquired, over time from either abstaining from something or even possibly having too much of something. But does food allergy work that same way, where it's like, you're not born with it, but just through randomness or through something that your body does, you acquire a food allergy later in life?
Yeah, you can. You can acquire it. You're never going to have it unless you're exposed to something. But an example of acquiring it is a baker. A baker may work in a bakery for 10 years, no problem with eggs. But at some point, that overexposure to eggs, because they use egg whites to paint on the top of the bakery and make it being all shiny and all this kind of stuff, and you cook with it. After a while, they can develop a severe egg allergy because of time. But usually it's these first couple of